This day in sports history. Hey, and welcome back to This Day in Sports History, a member of the Sports History Network. More great podcasts and more info can be found at sportshistorynetwork.com. It's May 15th, and on this day in 1990, it was the longest game in Stanley Cup Finals history. This was Game 1 between the Edmonton Oilers and the Boston Bruins in the Stanley Cup Finals at the old Boston Garden. This was a rematch of the '88 Stanley Cup Finals that the Oilers had won in 4 straight. Since then, though, Edmonton had struggled with Boston. In the 6 subsequent regular season meetings, Boston had won 5 of those with a tie mixed in. From the drop of the puck in Game 1, though, the Oilers looked a good bit sharper. After the first, Edmonton had a 1-0 lead after Adam Graves slipped one past Boston's Andy Moog. Midway through the second, the Oilers doubled their lead with Glenn Anderson leading the charge.
But it is Edmonton's Messier with Simpson and Anderson. Here's Anderson. He's going right in. He scores! Anderson from Messier, top corner, and it's 2-0 Edmonton.
It stayed that way into the third period. Boston defenseman Ray Bourque snatched one back early in the period, and then deep into the third, Boston got another one.
Center ice and coming out the Edmonton Oilers. Neely's shot. Blocked. It's centered. Score! Ray Bourque has scored again.
The game went to overtime, and the first OT were all-out blitzes on both ends. Shots were pinging the pipes, goalies making kick saves, stick saves, and glove saves, guys putting their bodies on the line to block shots. Edmonton's Asa Tikkanen thought for a moment that he'd ended the game, but his shot into the net was well after a whistle to stop play, and they kept playing into the second OT. It was scoreless for another overtime period, and they went to OT number 3. About midway through the third OT, somebody pulled the plug on the lights, and it was a little bit of a deja vu moment.
Go off. Now, I can't believe this, folks. I can't believe this. We were here in the playoffs 2 years ago, and we have got a power failure here at the Boston Garden. Can you believe this? Because you remember 2 years ago when these two clubs were in the Stanley Cup Final, the lights went out here in Boston. And
it wasn't completely dark in the Garden, but it was too dark to play. It took about 25 minutes to change out the fuses or whatever they did to get all the lights back on. And soon after they did, the Oilers' Peter Klima went lights out on the Bruins.
And it's out over the line. McTavish and Curry. Klima catching up. He's in. Shoots, scores. Klima gets the goal for the Edmonton Oilers here in the third overtime at 15-13. And what a win this has got to be for the Edmonton Oilers. Klima with the goal.
Klima's goal came with a little less than 5 to play in the third overtime, ending the 9th longest game in the NHL at that point. But this game is still the longest Cup Finals game, lasting 115 minutes, 13 seconds, topping the previous mark by a minute and a half, set back in 1930. This episode is brought to you by the Sterling Soap Company. Sterling Soap is 100% natural, and with a variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, cologne, and many more personal care products in a large variety of scents, you're sure to find something that's perfect for you or that special someone in your life. Check them out at sterlingsoap.com. On this day in 1912, Detroit Tiger Ty Cobb went into the stands at New York's Hilltop Park and started beating on a man who had been heckling him since the start of the game. Now, he may have been known as the Georgia Peach, but he was not a peach of a guy by any stretch. Most who played with him said he was easily angered, flat-out mean, consistently a bully, vindictive, and paranoid. In the fourth inning, the fan, Claude Lucker, said the wrong thing, or maybe a series of wrong things, after heaping criticism and vitriol on the Georgia Peach for the past hour, and Cobb tossed his glove down, raced into the outfield stands, and proceeded to pummel Lucker. Lucker also had the misfortune of not having any hands, so he couldn't exactly fight back. It didn't matter to Cobb, though. He hit him in the head, beat him to the ground, and then he spiked him. Fans around him screamed for him to stop, telling him he doesn't have any hands, to which Cobb replied, "I don't care if he doesn't have any feet." Cobb was ejected from the game, and American League President Ban Johnson handed down a 10-game suspension. There would be further repercussions that I'll talk about on this day in sports history for the 18th, and of course, this wasn't the only fight that Cobb would be known for. He famously got in fights with umpires, teammates, players on the other team, and even a hotel night watchman. On this day in 1941, it was just a simple ground ball that skated through the infield for a hit, but it was the first rumbling of a future earthquake. On this day in 1941, Joe Dimaggio hit safely in the first game of what would eventually be his Major League record 56-game hitting streak. On this day in 1981, Cleveland's Len Barker pitched a perfect game. The Cleveland Indians were at home on this cold and misty evening, taking on the Toronto Blue Jays. Barker is never going to be associated with the all-time greats of Major League Baseball, but he did have a solid 11-year career with the Rangers, the Indians, and the Braves. And this was the prime of his career. His 1980 season was his best. He won 19 games and he led the majors in strikeouts with 187. He would lead the majors in the strike-shortened 81 season as well. But here in May, a little less than a month before the strike would wipe out 2 months of the season, Barker was on top of his game. The Blue Jays didn't exactly present a murderer's row of hitters. In fact, they were the worst team in the American League, especially in the first half of this season. But the perfect game nearly was a moot point from the start. The first batter that night was Alfredo Griffin, who hit a ground ball that was destined to go into center field. But shortstop Tom Verizzer, showing some range to his left, snow-coned it in his webbing and then whipped the throw to first to nip Griffin by a half a step. That was the closest the Blue Jays would come to reaching base the rest of the night. Only 4 balls were hit hard enough to make it to the outfield. They were all cans of corn fly balls reeled in. Barker had control of his fastball all night, hitting the gun at 96 throughout the game, and he never came close to walking anybody. And he got stronger as the game went on. He struck out 11 on the night, with 7 of those Ks coming in the final 4 innings. When Ernie Whitt popped up for the 3rd out in the 9th, Len Barker had the 8th perfect game in modern Major League history and the first one in 13 years in the majors. A couple of interesting things from this game. Catching Barker that night was Ron Hassey, who would become the first and still only catcher in Major League history to catch 2 perfect games. He was the battery mate of Dennis Martinez when he threw his for the Montreal Expos in 1991. Also in the lineup that night for the Blue Jays was Danny Ainge. Ainge was in the Blue Jays organization when he was in college at BYU. After the 81 season, Ainge decided basketball was more for him, so he made himself eligible for the NBA draft and was selected by the Boston Celtics. But before he could play in the NBA, the Celtics had to buy out his contract with the Blue Jays. On this day in 1994, golfer Neal Lancaster won a 6-player playoff to claim victory in the Byron Nelson Classic. Rain had shortened the event from 72 holes to a 36-hole event, and at the end of the 36th hole, 6 golfers were tied for the lead. Interestingly enough, it would only take 1 extra hole to decide the winner, and it wasn't like Lancaster holed out from the fairway or anything crazy like that. Instead, he hit his approach to within 4 feet and rolled in a birdie to win. Nobody else in the group could equal it to force another hole. The 6-way playoff is the largest sudden death playoff in the history of the PGA Tour. And time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. The color green has been deadly throughout history. Well, at least it was in the 18th century. A popular shade of green created in the 1770s called Scheele's green was made with arsenic. It was used to pigment paint and wallpaper and even to dye children's clothes. Napoleon was a big fan of Scheele's green, and there is a thought that the pigment in his wallpaper was the cause of his death. The artists Monet and Cézanne used a pigment called Paris green that was also highly toxic. There are those who believe that the use of the color may have led to Monet's eventual blindness and the diabetes that Cezanne developed. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.
The heel gets the heat. The babyface gets the cheers. But the jobber gets, well, the job done. And speaking of jobbers, Barry Horowitz wasn't there to win titles. He was there to build them. By selling every move, every storyline, and every new star that stepped into the ring. He was the secret sauce. And now, he's the headline in his new book titled Wrestling is My Gimmick, My Life on the Wrong Side of the 3 Count. This memoir is a deep dive into wrestling's most underrated position and the man who made it an art form. Whether you're a fan of wrestling, a fan of sports history, or just love a great story, this book is for you. Again, that's Wrestling is My Gimmick by Barry Horowitz. Grab your copy today before the count strikes 3.